In the forested mountains of the Pacific Northwest in the United States, there are plenty of folks who make a living in the timber industry. They say that loggers sometimes encounter strange things in the woods. To them, the mysteries of the mountains and forests aren't all that uncommon. This is a story I heard from Uncle Jack, my dad's high school buddy. After graduating high school, Uncle Jack returned to his hometown in Oregon and joined his family in the logging business. He told me that people who grow up in the city might find weird happenings in the forest terrifying in a way that's hard to explain. But for him, it was just part of life. When Uncle Jack came back home, he had just turned 18. Back then, the demand for lumber was huge, so the logging companies and sawmills were raking in money. Work in the woods was insanely busy, so he often stayed in a small cabin in the middle of the forest with a few coworkers. The older guys would grumble about the packed schedule, but Uncle Jack didn't mind much. To him, working in the forest was a real joy. Still, during breaks in that remote wilderness, the biggest pastime was boozing and feasting. But Uncle Jack wasn't into alcohol, so come mealtime, he was the first one diving into the kitchen. He said that scarfing down a full meal made energy surge right back into him. Combined with the heavy labor of the day, he'd eat hearty meals and then sleep like a rock until morning. Around 9 p.m., the cabin would fill with the sound of snores as everyone hit the hay early. But unlike the older guys, Uncle Jack was young and recovered quickly, so sometimes he'd wake up in the middle of the night. Once awake, it was hard for him to drift off again. One night, he woke up and heard the strange noise again. It was the same sound he'd caught a few times before in the dead of night. Heave-ho. Heave-ho. Like the chants used when hauling heavy logs or working as a team, the kind old-time miners might use. He thought to himself, out in the forest, what else is there besides animals? But what kind of animal makes such an odd call? And if it wasn't an animal, who the heck would be wandering deep in the woods at midnight, chanting like that? Curious, he slipped out of the cabin and followed the sound. From a distance, he spotted a group of odd figures moving through the thicket opposite the cabin. He wondered what the hell they were. Looking closer, he saw it was a bunch of people dressed head to toe in white, pure white outfits like old-time workers' clothes, probably from the pioneer era. They staggered forward, each holding a flickering oil lantern, casting a dim glow. The leader was grunting, like groans from straining against a heavy load. A chill ran down Uncle Jack's spine. He figured he'd stumbled onto something dangerous. He started to back away quietly, but his foot snapped a dry branch with a loud crack. The group immediately spotted him and whipped their heads toward his direction. Uncle Jack and they locked eyes, the air freezing solid. Suddenly, a few of them leaped toward him. He bolted in panic. He said his legs felt like jelly from fear. He kept tripping and stumbling, but somehow he made it back to the cabin door and dove inside. The next morning, when everyone got up and stepped outside, they found the ground in front of the cabin littered with rabbit tracks and tufts of rabbit fur. His coworkers stared in surprise, then joked that the rabbits must have thrown a wild party and gotten sloshed out there. Only Uncle Jack's face was drained of all color. Later, he told an older coworker about it. The guy said that in the mountains and forests, all sorts of weird stuff happens. Don't sweat it too much. Maybe what you'd seen was just some fancy rabbit shape-shifting into human form to forage for food. After all, rabbits are nocturnal. And their cries sound just like umph anyway. This is a story that happened to my predecessor. Back then, he and a few friends were gathered around a campfire, drinking and chatting on a sweltering summer night. Since it was summer, everyone got excited, sharing all sorts of ghost stories, ramping up the party's atmosphere to a fever pitch. One of his buddies joked, "How about we test our guts for real?" Everyone claimed to be scared, but they all nodded in agreement anyway. Their destination was the notoriously haunted forest on the outskirts of a small town in Pennsylvania, a place locals whispered about, full of wandering spirits from bygone eras. On the drive there, they noticed one girl in the group, named Sarah, looking pale as a ghost, like she was blackout drunk. My predecessor asked, You okay? What's wrong? But Sarah just shook her head, saying it was nothing, probably just from having one too many beers. So they kept driving. When they arrived, the group got out and followed a trail into the woods. Suddenly, Sarah looked like she was about to pass out. She couldn't speak, just dropped to a squat by the roadside. Everyone crowded around in worry, ready to call it quits and get her back to the car. But right then, Sarah snapped her head up, her eyes rolling back white, and like she was possessed, she bolted straight into the deep forest, screaming incoherent ramblings no one could understand, sounding like whispers straight from hell. The whole group panicked, yelling, "What the hell?" Sarah, and chasing after her into the pitch-black woods. Sarah ran like the wind without a flashlight, weaving through the underbrush at a terrifying speed, leaving everyone struggling to keep up. Finally, they caught her at the base of a massive ancient oak tree. She was crouched down, frenziedly digging at the roots with her bare hands. They rushed in to stop her, but she wouldn't quit, clawing away like she was hypnotized. By then, everyone was shaking with fear, but they couldn't just abandon a friend, so they pinned her down with all their strength. Out of nowhere, Sarah threw her head back and let out a guttural roar that echoed through the forest. Then her whole body went limp, collapsing unconscious. Just as they were about to carry Sarah back to the car and rush her to the hospital, one friend pointed to the hole she dug. "Hey, look, seems like she hit something." Peering closer, they saw a pale, lifeless hand protruding from the damp soil. The group nearly fainted. They hurriedly dragged Sarah out of the woods, called an ambulance, and alerted the police. Sarah was whisked straight to the hospital, while I had to give statements at the station. Afterward, the cops combed the forest and unearthed the hastily buried body of a woman at the tree's roots. They spilled the whole tale to the sheriff, an old guy with a bushy beard and a smug face, who just shook his head wearily. "Yeah, messes like this are a real hassle. You boys go home and get some rest." They headed back, and the next morning, my predecessor and the others went to the hospital to check on Sarah. She was awake, back to her normal self, looking like nothing had happened. What a relief. They asked about that night, and Sarah recounted, "The closer the car got to the woods, the worse I felt. My mind started fading. When I squatted down to rest, I heard you all calling, but I couldn't respond. My body wasn't mine anymore. Suddenly, something invaded my head, forcing me to run into the forest. There, I saw a woman standing by the oak, her face sorrowful, but without a mouth. At the same time, my mind was compelled to save her. I remember the path clearly, but nothing about digging or being taken to the hospital. I only realized where I was when I woke up here." Sarah insisted she wasn't the type sensitive to ghosts or anything supernatural, so this whole experience was truly unbelievable. As for the killer, my predecessor said he had no idea if the cops ever caught them. But he whispered to me, "The smell of a corpse, once you catch a whiff, it's etched in your memory forever, kid." This is a bizarre experience I'll never forget from my college days in Oregon. Back then, I was a sophomore, and dorm life had gotten so monotonous. Just endless studying and lame parties. So one day, my 4 closest buddies and I crammed into my room. We gossiped and brainstormed ways to do something totally insane to shake off the boredom. At the time, there was this infamous banned book blowing up online about haunted spots across America. Something like Dark Secrets of the Cursed Forests. It described a deadly forest in the Cascade Mountains, known locally as the Suicide Forest, because of dozens of mysterious suicides dating back to the Great Depression. We stupid college kids that we were, devoured the book and got all hyped up. What if we head to that forest and hunt for dead bodies? The idea sounded nuts, but we all jumped on it without a second thought. So we packed the car, grabbed our gear, hit the road one weekend morning. The drive along those winding roads started out fun, with us belting out songs and cracking jokes. But a few hours in, the playful vibe evaporated. It took us 2.5 hours to get there, a popular tourist spot lined with signs like, "Life is worth living," "Think again," or "Your family and friend are waiting for you." The parking lot was packed with families, kids scampering around, which made for this eerie contrast with all the suicide prevention billboards. Anyway, we followed the book's directions into what it called the boundary between life and death. There was chillingly cold and gloomy, the rustling leaves sounding like whispered warnings. We'd heard rumors that once you stepped in, you'd lose your bearings immediately. The Cascade terrain is rugged, layered over ancient basalt rock, so you can't just hike in a straight line. For safety, I tied a plastic rope to the entrance, and we plunged in with this weird mix of excitement, like a body might be lurking around every corner. Inside the forest, stuff was scattered everywhere. Old sneakers, water bottles, pill bottles, even crumpled suicide notes and tattered journals. There were abandoned tents, too, as if someone had set up camp and then, poof, vanished. We scoured the place for ages, finding nothing but trash. No sign of any corpses. About 2 hours in, right around noon, we'd come up empty-handed. The initial tension eased into sighs of relief. Hunting for dead bodies isn't as easy as it sounds. I was out front with a stick, when suddenly a blood-curdling scream echoed from ahead. We all froze, faces draining of color. We'd all heard it crystal clear. It sounded like it ripped straight from hell, so we charged toward it, crashing through the underbrush. The guy behind me grabbed my arm and pointed at a thicket. Over there, something red and sloppy looking. I'll never forget that sight. We spotted a woman in a bright red dress, cheap cocktail dress style, dangling from a branch. I screamed in horror, and my friends jolted, asking what was up. I stammered out the details to the three who hadn't seen yet, and those idiots even joked. Run over and snap a pic. I'll sleep under the body tonight for laughs. Still, we crept closer, inching forward. From about 15 meters away, it came into focus, her head lolled at an impossible angle, the back of her neck facing us, face completely hidden. For me, in that moment, it was such a shock that my brain just shut down. I stood there rooted, thoughts blank, any courage to approach gone. The whole group went slack-jawed. The jokes dying as real shivers set in. One whispered, "How long has she been hanging there?" "Looks like forever." After a bit, we calmed down enough for me to pull out my camera to snap a shot, but another friend stopped me. "Don't be stupid." Seemed like it hit them harder than me. We lingered there forever, too scared to get any nearer. Out of nowhere, the body started to slowly rotate. She turned her face toward us. Cold sweat poured down like a shower. I couldn't look away. When her face came fully into view, it was rotting, flesh all mushy and blackened, jaw dangling loose. I was terrified, breath catching in my throat. And then, from that gaping, empty mouth, another agonized scream tore out, piercing, shredding the air. All 5 of us lost it. I was so scared my legs gave out. I collapsed and pissed myself. The 3 behind saw, hauled me up, and we bolted like whipped dogs, scrambling out of the forest. The whole way, that horrific scream chased us from the direction of the body. Finally, we burst into the crowded tourist parking lot. I dove into the bathroom to clean up, while my friends slumped on benches outside the gift shop, gasping for air. Once we somewhat composed ourselves, we drove home in total silence. No one uttered a word. From that day on, for months, I had the same nightmare. That woman standing right in front of me, screaming endlessly, to the point where I had to sleep with the lights on just to close my eyes. Turns out, all 5 of us dreamed the exact same thing. So we dragged ourselves to the local church, had the priest perform an exorcism rite, and only then did it start to fade. To this day, we still can't figure it out. How the hell could that dead woman's body scream? My family has been in the logging trade for generations in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. Our ancestors were among the first settlers, surviving off the dense forests, and they forged an ancient oath with the spirits of the wilderness, an unspoken pact for coexistence, in exchange for protection from the ancient trees and fertile soil. That's why, in our family, whenever a child is born and starts walking, we return to the family forest to plant a sapling. The act symbolizes the unbreakable bond with the mountains and woods, a vow to live and die alongside nature, and tribute to the spirits that have sheltered our bloodline through the ages. This tradition is upheld with ironclad reverence as an integral part of our pioneer heritage. A few months ago, while my grandfather, old Harlan, was still hale and hearty, I visited him at his weathered log cabin on the forest's edge. He sat by the fireplace, spinning a tale from the past that sent chills down my spine. It was back in the 1980s, during America's economic boom under Reagan, when folks were scrambling to flip real estate and build like mad. By then, the family logging business had passed to Grandpa's generation. His uncle, Uncle Earl, pitched selling off a hillside of timberland to developers, turning it into a suburban sprawl and shopping center. Grandpa fought it tooth and nail, calling it a betrayal of our ancestors' oath. But Uncle Earl shot back that clinging to the timber trade would leave the family scraping by, while the investors were offering sky-high prices, enough to change our fortunes overnight. Grandpa couldn't sway him, so they split the family and the business right down the middle. Afterward, Uncle Earl sold his half of the divided hill, transforming it into cookie-cutter frame houses and big-box stores. Relatives whispered and grumbled that he'd committed the ultimate taboo, turning his back on the land that had sustained our line. Maybe out of shame or flush with his windfall, Uncle Earl packed up his wife and kids and headed to the big city, Pittsburgh most likely, to chase an urban dream. Then, not long after, Grandpa got word that Uncle Earl had passed. At first, he figured it was just the frailty of age, the natural end of a mortal life. But the horror unfolded in the months that followed. Every month brought another death notice. Uncle Earl's kin dropped one by one. Car wrecks, mysterious illnesses, even his children gone for no clear reason. Less than 3 years after the sale, that branch of the family was wiped out. No son left to carry on the name. From then on, Grandpa doubled down on safeguarding the family forest, treating it like a sacred calling. But a few months back, Harlan himself passed from old age. Lately, my Uncle Jed, my dad's brother, has dredged up the old proposal, sell off a chunk of the woods to developers for a resort and highway extension. Dad, of course, is dead set against it, and watching those two brothers bicker just like Grandpa and Uncle Earl did back in the day leaves me unable to crack even a grim smile. I remember clear as day how my cousins and I planted those saplings ourselves as kids, part of the family oath. If there's truly some bond with the wilds, maybe we ought to honor our promise. Selling it off cheap, who knows what curse might befall our line next. Near my house in the suburbs of Seattle, Washington, there's this small, quaint forest that I'd only visited once before, and even then, just skirting the edge. Inside, it looks pitch black, even during the day. You peer in from outside and see nothing but inky darkness, with trees crowding thick and towering high. A few years back, they built a little trail winding through it to encourage locals to go hiking, one of those city green initiatives. So I'd occasionally take my dog, a Labrador named Max, for a stroll in there. But I'd never dared venture deep, just lingering around the entrance. Then one day, I decided to push to the end of the trail and see what was up. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, leaves drifting down like golden confetti. I leashed up Max, and off we went. The air inside was refreshingly cool, nothing out of the ordinary, just that the deeper we got, the dimmer the light and the chillier the bite. At the trail's end, it turned out to be a dead end. The path didn't cut through the forest. It just stopped at a thicket of brush. Well, we were already there, so why not poke a bit further? Max and I waded through the weeds, pressing on into the heart of the woods. Before long, we stumbled upon this gorgeous little pond, nestled at the base of a sheer cliff, about 2 stories high from where I stood. The spot was breathtaking, like a hidden paradise tucked away in the wilds. I thought to myself, who knew the forest right by home was hiding a gem like this? Suddenly, Max lost it, barking furiously toward the pond, his hackles raised like he'd spotted something horrifying. Then he whipped around, snapped his leash clean off, and bolted back toward home, leaving me stranded. I stood there stunned, about to chase after him, when I caught faint voices. At first, I figured I'd misheard, so I froze, holding my breath to listen. It was my name they were calling. John? John, not clearly male or female, or maybe a whole chorus, voices low and lilting. They repeated it a few times, and now I was dead certain they were calling me for real. The echoes rose from down in the pond. I figured it must be some friends who'd coincidentally shown up below, so I shouted back. But no reply, just the relentless chanting of my name over and over. Then I glanced down at the pond and spotted a few murky black shapes along the water's edge. My heart pounded. From this distance, I should have been able to make out faces, but they were solid black, like shadowy silhouettes. They seemed to be waving at me. I'm the type who's pretty gutsy, always testing my limits, but in that moment, goosebumps erupted all over, and an inexplicable dread weighed me down. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned tail and sprinted home. As I crashed out of the forest, the calls followed, growing louder, like pleas begging me to come back. I didn't dare look over my shoulder, just ran flat out until I hit the pavement. Back home, Max was sprawled out front, eyeing me with that "What took you so long, boss?" Looked like he was smirking at me. Even though he ditched me mid-trail, the dog's smart as a whip and loyal to a fault, so I couldn't stay mad. A few days later, that pond still shimmered in my mind like a flawless nature painting, and with my stubborn streak, I resolved to head back and face it. Like I said, I'm not the sort to bolt from ghost stories. After that, I visited the pond a couple more times. But each time we neared the forest entrance, Max would tuck tail and hightail it home, trembling like he'd seen the devil himself. So I went solo. The second I stepped into the woods, I felt the eyes on me, invisible stares lurking just behind, tracking every footfall. Nearing the pond, the calls rang out clearer than ever. On the last trip, as I was turning to leave after another visit, a low, gravelly whisper hissed right in my ear. One more time. Just the last one. I freaked, bolting home without a backward glance. From then on, I swore I'd never set foot near that damn pond again. I could feel it viscerally, a vague threat, like something down there was lying in wait, eager to lure me in for the final pull. Even now, whenever I pass the forest, I catch faint echoes of my name drifting from its depths, a seductive invitation. There's something in that pond waiting, hungry to drag me under one last time. About 30-something years ago, when I was still a high school kid in a remote corner of the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee, I had an encounter that haunts me to this day. It was an experience that convinced me the world is full of things beyond human understanding. Here's how it went. My family lived in a small mountain town where folks still moved to the slow rhythm of the old pioneers. I had this buddy named Shane, the real king of the woods. He'd trout fish in headwater streams or trap small game with homemade snares. Shane spent his weekends from dusk till dawn in a deep pocket of the forest, near a little waterfall tumbling off a cliff. One summer, Shane and I planned to go fishing at his favorite spot. I waited at the forest entrance, but Shane was always punctual as a clock. If we had plans, he'd show up early. That day, though, I waited a full 20 minutes with no sign of him. Worried, I jogged over to Shane's place. On the way, I ran into his grandma, Granny Evelyn, a silver-haired old woman with eyes sharp as switchblades, sitting on her porch. She said Shane had a raging fever and was laid up flat in bed, and she apologized for him. I figured sickness happens, but I still wanted to fish solo. If I got lucky, I'd snag a big one to send over for his recovery. So I grabbed my rod and headed into the woods alone. I remembered the headwaters with a waterfall made for prime fishing, so I followed the stream upstream. The forest was pitch dark, choked with underbrush and muddy trails. Some spots were a real scramble, like the paths of old-time explorers. Finally, I reached a flatter clearing, and that's when I started hearing the waterfall's steady roar. By then, I was on edge about running into a black bear or a mountain lion, those fierce Appalachian beasts, so I clacked rocks together as I went to make noise. Suddenly, I felt this weird, unnatural shift, like the air turned thick and heavy all at once. I froze, listening hard. A shiver crawled up my spine. Every sound around me had vanished. The waterfall's crash, the birdsong, the wind through the bushes, all swallowed into a dead, suffocating silence that nearly choked me. Instinctively, I held my breath, then tapped a rock near my ear. No echo. I rubbed my ears, hearing the faint rustle of my own skin. So it wasn't deafness. Something was blocking out every noise from the outside world. I'd never faced anything this bizarre, and real panic set in. I thought, this is bad, turn around and run now. But right then, my body quit on me. I stood ramrod straight like a statue, then locked up solid as if frozen, like a pine struck by lightning. Cold sweat poured from my scalp and back. I wanted to scream, but my throat clamped shut. I tried twitching a finger, managed a bit, but my rod clattered to the ground, and instantly I was pinned again. Body immobile, as the only thing I could swivel. That's when I spotted a bank of white mist drifting in from ahead. It engulfed me fast, so thick my visibility dropped to about a meter. I stared into the void in front, then caught something hulking out of the corner of my right eye, emerging from the brush, enormously huge. Was it a grizzly? It drew closer, shape sharpening, a towering human figure in an ancient Cherokee shaman's fur cloak, head and shoulders above me, with feathers swaying on a headdress. Human-like, but utterly silent. Then I felt something on the tree behind me and over my head, a hand reaching from behind, clamping my mouth and forcing my head down low. I panicked to the core, no clue what lurked back there. Tears welled up from sheer terror. In my mind, it was just a loop of desperate prayer. Lord, please don't kill me. Don't take me away. The horror swelled. I could do nothing but plead silently. It kept coming closer. Abruptly, the rod on the ground went dark. Then I saw a pair of massive feet, like house pillars, crossing in front of me from right to left, slow and deliberate. With my head jammed down, that's all I could see, heavy, weathered leather boots. What followed was a grotesque procession. Deer with antlers like ancient tree branches, squat black bears with impossibly broad shoulders, shaggy boars charging past, even a gigantic gray wolf with gleaming fangs. They marched in single file, unnaturally huge, like phantoms from mountain lore. 2 or 3 minutes later, the parade passed, and the air fell still again, but this time it was the hush after a storm. The rod flickered back to life, the hand over my mouth and head released, retreating into the shadows. My body thawed bit by bit, and I collapsed in a heap, limbs like wet noodles. I twisted to look left and behind, just the mist fading into the distance, dissolving. At the same moment, the waterfall's roar, birdsong, and wind rushed back. The world snapped normal, like nothing had happened. I gasped for air, drenched in sweat, fishing forgotten. I scrambled up and bolted for the exit, heart pounding like war drums. On the run, I swore something chased me. Instinct screamed, don't stop, don't look back. I tore through the woods like my life hung by a thread. When I snapped out of it, I was near the entrance, not far at all. I halted, panting, then eased forward. Looking up, I startled. On a high branch, a murder of black crows perched, eyes gleaming down at me. They followed my path like an escort. Moments later, the lead one cawed, then pecked at the ground with its beak. I followed its point, a massive footprint stamped in the mud, twice the size of a grown man's. I glanced up again. The crows were gone. After that, I made it out of the woods safe and sound, back home in one piece. I spilled it all to Shane. He said he'd brushed up against something similar in the woods a few times, but never this close. Shane explained he'd never faced the parade head-on, because whenever they appeared, the crows would swoop in out of nowhere, herding him into the brush. They'd clamp his mouth with a wing, force his head low, just like they'd saved me that day. Probably to stay hidden. We hashed it over endlessly, still clueless about the towering shaman leading the pack or what the hell the procession meant. Even tough guy Shane never dared a straight look, because the crows seemed downright terrified. Either way, we learned to tread careful. The Smoky Mountains woods are lousy with mysteries. After that brush, I started believing the world really holds the inexplicable, maybe spirits of ancient Cherokees or ghosts of lost pioneers. And I'm grateful to those crows till my dying day. Without them that afternoon, I might have been swept into the parade, lost forever in the mist and the deep woods. This is a bizarre experience that changed my life forever, happening a few years back when I was still a student. That summer, my four classmates, all thrill-seeking young fools, and I decided to test our nerves on a dare. One guy in the group, Jake, piped up, "Hey, why not hit up the Death Forest at the base of Mount Rainier? They say it's super haunted." We all cracked up, thought it sounded epic, and jumped on board without hesitation. So the five of us piled into the car and drove east through the twisting roads of the Pacific Northwest. By the time we arrived, it was pitch black. We hesitated for a bit. The forest loomed dark and impenetrable, wind howling through ancient firs like whispers from hell. But we'd come all this way, so when we plunged, flashlights at the ready. Inside, the trees were thicker than we'd imagined, the path narrow and claustrophobic. We barely made it 40 meters before chickening out and turning back. As we debated the way out, suddenly, from somewhere in the gloom, came the mournful strains of a hymn, like it was drifting from some abandoned Depression-era church. We got chills and hustled back along the old trail. That's when I spotted it behind a massive boulder, a woman dangling from a noose, her neck snapped tight by an old rope. The whole group lost it for real, screaming bloody murder as we bolted for the highway. Once out, we called the cops right away and sat there waiting, terror-stricken. Then one of us did a head count. "Wait, where's Emily?" Emily, the sweet, always smiling girl in our group, was gone. We figured she'd gotten lost in the woods, so we yelled her name at the top of our lungs, but only the wind answered. In desperation, the cop cars wailed up. We stammered out the story, and the officers, in their dark blue uniforms, led us back into search. They quickly found the body behind a rock, but Emily was nowhere to be seen. Rescue teams ramped up, scouring everywhere, but nothing. One cop asked me this weird question. "You said the missing girl is Emily Johnson, right?" I nodded frantically. He pulled out a driver's license. It was Emily's, photo crystal clear. "You found her." I blurted, but the cop shook his head, voice low and grave. "No. This belongs to the woman who hanged herself." We went dead silent. How could that be? We rushed over to the body, and sure enough, it was Emily, face ashen, eyes vacant. The group crumbled. We babbled explanations to the police that she was our classmate, but they didn't buy it, dismissing it as some dumb prank by reckless kids. We even got chewed out for wasting their time. The three of us, now down to three since Emily had vanished, slunk back to the dorms. Once there, we dug out all our group photos from school. Not a single one showed Emily. We'd supposedly spent months together. We asked around with other friends. No one remembered her. Our memories of Emily, study sessions, post-class coffees, now felt like a dream. We were utterly bewildered but couldn't accept it. A month later, we drove to the small suburb outside Portland, her hometown for the license, to dig for answers. We rang the bell, and Mrs. Johnson, Emily's mom, a middle-aged woman with dyed blonde hair, answered the door. We spilled the whole tale, trembling like we were reciting a fairy tale. She invited us in, voice choked. On the table sat Emily's portrait. Through the conversation, the horrifying truth unraveled. Emily had dreamed of being a kindergarten teacher since she was a kid, so she'd aced her certification and enrolled in our community college that spring. But right before classes started, it all fell apart. Fired from her part-time job over harassment from her boss, then dumped by her long-term boyfriend, a truck driver. Shattered dreams and no emotional anchor left. Emily vanished from life, wandering to the Death Forest and ending it all. Hearing that, our hearts broke. Maybe Emily's spirit, after death, still yearned to chase that dream, so she haunted us as a friend, living the college days she'd never had. And in the end, she led us to the forest to reveal the truth, so her story could be known. It's been years now. I've become a teacher at a little school outside Seattle. But to this day, I haven't forgotten that phantom friend, Emily Johnson, and a reminder that sometimes unfinished dreams can return from the shadows. This is an experience I had while working in the timber industry in the rainforests of Oregon in the Pacific Northwest. Simply put, my job was as a faller. a trade passed down through generations in the vast forests our ancestors cleared long ago. The landowners usually own their plots outright, handed down like family heirlooms. They know the mountains, the trees, and how to live in harmony with the untamed wilderness. So when you first step into the profession, the first rule is to listen to the old-timers. No one knows their patch of woods better than they do. Logging is grueling work. Scaling cliffs, running chainsaws and cranes, felling trees and hauling timber, plus patrolling the forest to tend seedlings for the next generation. It's tough, but it pays well. These days, though, most folks see it as dirty, dangerous, and demanding. Back when I was green, I tagged along with a seasoned vet named Buck, a big, burly guy with a classic lumberjack sideburns, to learn some chainsaw tricks deep in the woods. Midway through, out of nowhere, we heard singing. Both of us caught it clear as day. The voice was raspy and mournful, strangely woven into the chirp of insects and birdsong. It didn't sound like a radio or speaker at all, more like someone actually singing from the heart of the forest. I was intrigued, ready to pause and listen, but Buck's face hardened, and he barked, "Pack up fast, we're getting out now." We scrambled to gather our gear, and he hustled me out of there like a shot. I prodded him on the way back, and he smirked. My old foreman used to say, if you hear that song in the woods, you run like hell. Something unnatural shows up, or at least nature's wrath comes crashing down. He warned me straight, "Steer clear, kid. Curiosity'll get you killed." His words hit me hard. I pressed, "But who's singing?" It didn't sound mechanical at all. He shook his head. "Exactly, 'cause it's that thing singing. I don't know what it is for sure, but I've seen it play out." Early on, a few guys on my crew met disaster right after hearing it. One got mangled when his saw kicked back, another spotted some freakish shape lurking, or a grizzly came out of nowhere. Then there was the time I lived through a real nightmare. He went on, one day he and the foreman were cutting timber when the singing started, but they didn't bail right away. Next thing, the ground gave way in a roaring landslide, wiping out the work road. Then fog rolled in thick as night in broad daylight. They ran for their lives, hunkering down by a massive old-growth sequoia, the kind that's an Oregon icon. They were trapped for hours, blind in the murk, couldn't see their own hands. Only when the singing finally stopped did the fog lift. After that, the mill's rescue crew found them. Weird part was, the rescuers said they'd combed that sequoia twice and seen nothing. Third sweep, there they were. Buck's tale left me with this mix of dread and eerie fascination. He drilled it in one last time. If you hear it again, bolt. No second guessing, no thrill seeking. While I worked at that mill, I caught the singing twice more, that same gravelly echo from the depths. But thanks to Buck, I got out in time, and nothing bad came of it. Let me recount a supernatural experience I had a few years ago at a movie theater. I won't reveal the name of the theater. It closed down not long after my terrifying encounter. That incident still lingers vividly in my memory, even after all this time. The evening started as a normal outing with friends to watch a movie. After the credits rolled and the lights came on, I felt the need to use the restroom. My friends decided to wait outside while I headed in alone. It was a classic old-style design. Upon entering, you'd see a row of sinks, followed by 5 stalls, all occupied. I joined 2 other women who were patiently waiting for a stall to open. I couldn't help but overhear their grumbling about the seemingly endless wait. 10 minutes passed without anyone emerging from any stall. Strangely, it was completely silent inside them. Our frustration grew, and one woman voiced her annoyance at the prolonged delay. Suddenly, from the last stall against the wall, a deep, eerie woman's voice rang out, suggesting, "Why don't you knock on the doors?" The suggestion made sense, and I wondered why we hadn't thought of it earlier. We decided to act together, lightly knocking on each stall door in turn. There was no response from any. But when we reached the last one, the source of the voice, we bent down to look through the gap under the door. We were stunned to see nothing there. No feet, no shoes, just empty space. Our curiosity quickly turned to real horror as we checked the cracks around the door. revealing a completely empty stall. Panic set in, and all three of us rushed frantically toward the main door of the restroom, the only exit. However, when we tried to turn the handle, it wouldn't budge, locking us inside. We struggled desperately with the door, all the while hearing that eerie woman's laughter emanating from the last stall, a shrill, deep, bone-chilling cackle. In desperation, we screamed for help, our voices echoing in the air. That's when a theater employee opened the door from the outside effortlessly, as if it had never been locked. Her reaction wasn't surprised. Instead, she simply told us to leave, urging us to get out immediately. As we stumbled out of the restroom, the employee added a cryptic warning. Things like this happen here all the time. When you leave, remember not to touch any of the curtains. I was curious but confused, initially not understanding the meaning of the warning. However, I later learned that these curtains were typical fixtures in old-style theaters, decorating along the walls. Her warning stemmed from the belief that spirits often linger along these walls and in the corners of such buildings. In the years that followed, the theater gradually fell into ruin, haunted by countless inexplicable encounters like ours. It makes me wonder if these terrifying incidents contributed to its closure. I want to share an experience from 1985 when I worked in maintenance. My main responsibility was overseeing an underwater tunnel. The perks of the job were incredibly appealing, with flexible hours even for the night shift, and a salary that was quite impressive for the time. The retirement benefits were also very attractive, which made me truly love the work. However, one fateful night changed everything. It all started with an observation during one of my night shifts. I noticed an unusual amount of excess salt on the tunnel floor, along the walls at a specific spot. This suggested there might be a leak or crack, allowing seawater to seep in and evaporate, leaving behind the accumulated salt buildup. Situations like this required calling in an engineer for inspection. The engineer arrived the next night, and as part of my role on the maintenance team, I had to accompany him during the checks. These inspections stretched over several nights, starting at 1 a.m. each time. We closed off one lane of the tunnel for safety reasons, and also because traffic was so sparse at that hour. It was on the third night working with the engineer that things began to get strange. Around 1:20 a.m., with hardly any vehicles in sight, I received a radio call from the office staff monitoring the tunnel cameras. They reported spotting 5 individuals, a man, a woman, and 3 children. They were seen entering the tunnel. This was extremely unusual, as the tunnel was strictly for vehicles, and pedestrians were strictly prohibited. I was instructed to approach the entrance to ascertain their intentions and inform them of the regulations. As I jogged toward the entrance, I caught a glimpse of the group, and to my surprise, they veered toward one of the staff-only doors. There were 3 doors at the tunnel entrance, each serving a different purpose. The first led to the other side of the tunnel, the second was a storage room for electronics and tools, and the third went upstairs to the ventilation system control area. They chose the third door. I followed them through it, and I distinctly remember a loud cracking sound right before they vanished from view. It sounded like joints popping, but much louder. When I entered the room, it was completely empty, no trace of any human presence. The room was fairly small, with no place to hide, especially for 5 people. I knew I wasn't hallucinating. The sighting had been witnessed by my colleagues on the cameras. This was the first bizarre incident. Frustration turned to bewilderment as I searched every corner of the room for clues, but found nothing. The mystery remained unsolved. A few nights later, after completing my patrol rounds, I returned to the office inside the tunnel, about a 5-minute walk away. The office had a large window from which I could observe the entire roadway and any approaching vehicles. That night, I dozed off in my chair, anticipating the end of my shift, when suddenly a sharp slap across my face jolted me awake. A surge of alertness hit me as I scanned the room for an intruder, but there was no one. The eerie silence of the late night only amplified the surreal nature of the experience. The sensation on my face was all too real, a stinging, numb burn from the slap. Confused and disoriented, I I sat still, wrestling with the fear building in my mind. About 30 minutes later, I tried to resume my interrupted nap and began to drift off. Then, I was confronted by the very man I had seen earlier. He appeared full of rage, accusing me of taking his son's leg. According to him, when I chased after them a few days before, his son's leg had been severed, and he demanded I return it. Then, abruptly, I woke up drenched in sweat despite the chilly night air. This nightmarish encounter repeated every time I dozed off during my shift. I tried everything, carrying a Bible, onions, constant prayers, but nothing could dispel those dreams. Ultimately, those horrifying experiences forced me to quit. I was completely overcome by fear. Many years later, an older colleague revealed a long-buried secret. During the tunnel's construction phase, some laborers and their families lived right on the site. These were people often facing financial hardships or recent immigrants from the mainland. They frequently slept in tents pitched near the work areas. The tragedy struck one evening when a massive slab of concrete from the tunnel ceiling collapsed. That enormous piece crushed a tent where a worker and his family were sleeping. The incident was covered up from the public. No one ever knew. I believe the man in my recurring dreams was part of that tragedy. Since leaving that job, I've never experienced anything like it again. My wife and I had been house hunting for months. It turned into our weekend routine, meeting our realtor to check out new places. Last Saturday, a listing popped up in a great neighborhood at a fair price, so we scheduled a viewing for Sunday morning. We pulled up around 10 a.m. and started the tour. Right away, it was clear an older couple had lived there. The wallpaper was outdated, the colors were from another era, and there was even a stair lift, that electric chair on rails, leading down to the basement. We checked the kitchen and bedrooms. Everything seemed solid enough. Then we hit this old craft room with built-in shelves and a desk. That detail matters later. After the main floor, we headed downstairs. Heads up, the basement lights wouldn't turn on. I figured a breaker had tripped. Some upstairs lights were out too. The layout was weird. At the bottom of the stairs, you go left for the finished part or right for the unfinished utility area. We all veered right first. I poked around the water softener and storage shelves while my wife wandered left to the finished side. A second later, I heard her say she couldn't go in there. I laughed, thinking she was just messing around. It was a dark, dusty room, easy to get spooked by. Our realtor went to check and came right back with the same vibe. I figured they were feeding off each other's nerves. So I grabbed my phone, cranked the flashlight to max, and strode in like it was no big deal. I made it 2 steps before everything hit me. A wave of ice-cold dread washed over me. My whole body locked up. I recoiled like I'd been slapped. No warning, no build-up. 1 second I was fine. The next, I knew deep in my gut. This room didn't want me here. It felt occupied. By something. Or someone. And it was pissed. My phone's beam barely cut the dark, except for a faint glow from a tiny window at the far end. Overcast sky outside. Nausea hit hard. I backed out fast, hit the stairs, and said, "Let's go upstairs." No one argued. Out in the backyard, we all spilled what happened. My wife said a real push, like hands on her shoulders, shoved her back when she tried to enter. That's why she joked about not being able to go in. The realtor felt the same gut punch anxiety I did, total get out vibes. We walked the yard, then went back inside to close blinds and flip lights off. As my wife climbed the stairs, the realtor spotted a scrap of yellow lace dangling from her sweater. Normally, no biggie, probably static. But after that basement, it felt off. Creepy. We didn't want any souvenirs, so the realtor tucked it in the craft room. We locked up, chatted more in the driveway, and drove off. That night, drifting off to sleep, I had this quick dream. I was back at the house nighttime, standing at the top of those stairs, staring down. The stair lift kicked on by itself, whirring down slow, like it was inviting me, baiting me. I snapped awake, heart pounding. No more dreams like that, thank God. I'm usually a skeptic, open to ghosts, but always hunting for a logical fix. This? Maybe low oxygen in the damp basement, or group panic snowballing. But after a couple days chewing on it, I'll just say what my gut tells me: two spirits, the old couple who lived there. Upstairs was her turf, cozy, light, welcoming. That lace? Her little welcome gift to my wife. Basement room, his spot. Grumpy old guy, didn't like drop-ins. Not evil, just, this is mine, scram. Whatever it was, good or bad, we're skipping the offer. Some houses pick you. This one, pick no. It's been a full year since this road trip mess went down, and just thinking about it still brings tears to my eyes. I don't cry much, but the fear hits me like a truck every time. If I try telling the story out loud, I start sobbing right away. My brother and I drove from Ohio to visit friends in Portland, Oregon. The trip out was mostly boring. We powered through in a little over 2 days nonstop. The only weird thing, on those long stretches of empty country road, no side streets, no nothing, a car would just pop up behind us out of nowhere. We'd both yell, "Whoa, where'd that come from?" Then 5 minutes later, poof, gone. No turnoffs, no way it could have passed us. The first time happened just 5 hours in, way too early for us to be hallucinating from tiredness. My brother's the logical type. He's usually the one calming me down when I get spooked. But he was just as rattled. It happened a few more times, but we started laughing it off. What else could we do? Keep driving, right? The real horror show was the drive home. We took the scenic route south through California. Coastal Highway 1, the Redwoods, Grand Canyon, all that bucket list stuff. We cruised through San Francisco on the first day, into the night. Once we got out of the city, I was behind the wheel, and my brother crashed out for a couple hours sleep. No big deal. But then my GPS went haywire. I picked the coastal route, drive maybe 10 minutes, and it'd try to reroute me inland. I'd ignore it, but after getting twisted around in the dark for an hour, I caved. Any path to LA looked the same at night, so I followed the stupid thing. Took a solid 10 minutes to hit a highway. GPS says turn left, but there's a median and a big left turn sign. Another sign points right for Highway 1 South, which is what I wanted anyway. Sweet, I go right. Here's the kicker. I was only on that highway for 5 minutes tops. I know because I kept glancing at the clock like a maniac. From the second I turned right, the GPS map starts spinning like crazy. No reroute, no nothing, just frozen. I was stressed, didn't recognize any exit signs, so I bailed at the next one. Past one exit, took the second. The second I hit that exit ramp, GPS snaps back to life and starts guiding me. But a car pulls off right behind me, makes the same turns, every one. Pitch black country roads, no lights, no towns. And those headlights, blasting right into my rearview mirror the whole time. After about 15 minutes, I'm crying. Full-on tears rolling down. Every stop sign, I'm thinking, this is it, they're gonna kill us. Totally irrational, but that's how scared I was. Pure terror. 45 minutes, this car tails me. I'm trying to stay cool, let my brother sleep. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe this is just some normal backroad shortcut through California. Finally, I spot a street light up ahead at a stop sign. I pray, please let there be a gas station, a store, people. No, it's the on-ramp for that same highway. The one with the median and no left turn sign. Exact spot I started from almost an hour ago. I'm back on the highway for another 5 minutes, follow the GPS off the next exit, and boom, 45 minutes later, same damn stop sign. I roll to a halt, check the rear view for the millionth time, and the headlights are gone. Vanished. I lose it, burst into terrified sobs, and gun it left, right over the median, whatever. Screw the signs. My brother wakes up, sits bolt upright, starts chatting. We're not big on getting emotional with each other, so I have no clue if we even talked about my crying. I remember thinking, if I spill this, I'll be too freaked to finish the drive, so I shoved it down, pretended it was nothing. The rest of the night? Smooth sailing. GPS fine, no ghost cars, totally normal. Like I said, it's been a year. The details might have faded a bit, but typing this out, I'm crying again, jumping at every creak in the house. My skin crawls just reliving it. I haven't bothered theorizing what it was. Doesn't change the fact that I'll never forget. And yeah, I'll probably steer clear of that stretch of road forever.